This is 100 2-minute exposures on M51, shot with the SVBONY MK127 and the SVBONY 605CC camera. That's about 3 hours and 20 minutes of total exposure through a telescope camera combo that is shockingly inexpensive compared to the usual SCT Galaxy season setup people recommend. And honestly, this image is really good. It's not perfect, it's not magic, and it's not we should sell all of our telescopes and start a Mac cult good, but good enough that I had to take this scope seriously. Because on paper, this little 127mm Maksutov style telescope has a very interesting trick. It gives you 1500 millimeters of focal length. And that's the same native focal length as this Celestron C6. So for small galaxies, globular clusters, planetary nebula, and all those little space objects where focal length actually matters, this thing starts to look very interesting. And later in this video, I'll show you the free 3D printed accessories that I've made for it. Because with the C6, some of those common add-ons are not cheap at all. Like this dew shield is about $100, and here's a 3D printed one for the Mark 127. This focus motor bracket can be around $40, and a lot of the focus motors you buy don't include the SCT specific bracket you actually need, so you end up having to buy one of those extra. So I made the dew shield and the focus bracket for the MK127, and I'm giving away the files for free. But before you go buy one of these telescopes, there is a catch. Actually, there might be several catches. This scope here takes longer to cool down than my SCTs. The collimation process was not like it is on my classic Celestrons. And at one point, I was seriously questioning whether I had a bad sample, bad collimation, bad seeing, or just a new type of telescope-induced madness. And it's not only an imaging question. This also comes with a lot of the visual hardware you need in the box. It has enough focal length to be interesting on the moon and planets, and it's compact enough that I could see this becoming my small, long focal length travel scope. So today, this is the real sky review of the SVBONY MK127. Wait for that car to pass. Not just can it take a pretty picture, but would I actually recommend it as a compact budget galaxy hunter? Would I use it as a spotting scope in this setup? Does it make sense as a small visual or planetary scope? It's got SCT threads, so you can mount most common aftermarket focusers. If that kind of real sky testing is useful, get subscribed and hit the like button. If you want more beginner focused gear reviews where we actually show the data, it helps convince the algorithm that this isn't just AI slop, and I promise that it isn't. All right, let's bring this inside before it gets too hot and put it next to way too many other small catadioptric telescopes, and let's break down what this thing actually is. The SVBONY MK127 is a 127mm Maksutov Cassegrain telescope. It has a native focal length of 1500 millimeters. But there's a little bit of nuance here. This doesn't appear to be a simple spot design a lot of people think of when they picture a small Mac like any of these ETXs or these old Celestrons. SVBONY describes this as a 2-mirror Mac structure with a separate secondary mirror and a flat field design. So that puts it closer to what many people would call a Rumac style Maksutov Cassegrain, or at least a separate secondary Maksutov Cassegrain. The practical point is this: the separate secondary can give the optical designer more freedom to correct the field, especially off-axis issues like coma and astigmatism. And that's part of why this scope is interesting for imaging as well, not just for visual use. But the trade-off to that is sort of a little bit of additional complexity over here on the front. A simple spot Mac has the secondary essentially built into the corrector. Like here's the ETX 125. This scope here, though, has a real secondary mirror alignment system. That means that there's a lot more potential for correction, but also, more ways for collimation to get weird. One of the nice things about these was if you got a good one, it just always stayed that way. But with that collimation, that puts this in a really interesting spot. Compared to the Celestron C5, the MK127 has about 2% more aperture by diameter, but about 20% more focal length. So it's not dramatically bigger than a C5, but it does reach noticeably further. Now, if you compare it to a C6 like that one, the MK127 has that same 1500 millimeter native focal length, but the C6 does have about 18% more aperture. So in theory, the Mark 127 is sitting actually right between these two scopes, but with a very different optical design. And SVBONY actually includes in the package a reducer for this scope, which drops the focal length down to like 975 millimeters. That matters because reducers for comparable SCTs are not free. If you're looking at something like a C5 or a C6, the reducer is usually an extra purchase. That's about $100-something bucks, and that changes the real cost of like an imaging system. For this video though, I mostly wanted to test the MK127 at its native focal length. The whole reason this scope is interesting to me is really long reach. So if we compare it to some of the more like ETX 90, which is this one back here, it's got basically double the light gathering area and 20% more focal length than the common sort of 1250 millimeter versions of these. Compared to the ETX 105, the Mark 127 has about 21% more aperture by diameter, which equates to, again, something like 40% more light gathering area and roughly the same focal length, actually. These little Max and small catadioptrics are super portable, and they can be great for visual use, lunar, planetary, and like casual observing. But for deep sky imaging, especially galaxies, aperture and focal length really start to matter, as well as like how are you going to connect a camera to one of these. Usually it requires like a weird adapter and it doesn't have a big imaging circle. That's why the MK127 is interesting. It's still compact, like this is my 3D printed dew shield, but without that, like this is still pretty small. But on focal length, it moves all the way into sort of C6 galaxy season category while staying much closer to the C5 in size. Galaxy season is where small scopes can start to feel, you know, a little short. A wide field refractor is great for nebula, but when you point it at M51, sometimes it feels like you're photographing a decorative comma. I'll actually throw an image here of something I've been shooting with one of those. So for my main image, I left the reducer off. They do give it to you for free, but I didn't want to use it. I wanted to use the full 1500 millimeter focal length. For the imaging test, I paired the MK127 with the SVBONY SV605CC. This camera uses Sony's IMX533 sensor in its color, which I think is honestly a really nice match for this scope, better than some of those pricey APS-C cameras. The 533 sensor makes a lot more sense. It does give you a square field. It avoids pushing too far into that outer imaging circle, and it still frames small galaxies really nicely, as you can see from this picture. This is the kind of setup that I think like a beginner or budget-conscious imager might actually build for their first galaxy scope. A small, long focal length scope and a cooled color camera. Enough reach for galaxies and not a lot of weight. One other thing SVBONY did really well is the included accessory package. So like I said before, the MK127 comes with this 0.65 reducer, I believe. It also comes with both a 1.25 inch and a 2-inch visual back, which is kind of nice. It has 2 finder brackets built into it. These come pre-attached. And I know those details might sound boring, but they're only boring until you start pricing this stuff out separately. With a lot of telescopes, especially the SCTs, the base optical tube is only, part of the cost. Then you have to add in a reducer. You have to add in a visual back that's not garbage. And this visual back is so much nicer than the Celestron ones. With the MK127, a lot of that stuff is just included out of the box. That doesn't make it a better telescope, but it does make the value conversation a lot more interesting. So at current sale pricing, the MK127 plus this SV605CC deep sky color camera is substantially cheaper than trying to build a comparable C6 setup. And honestly, with the right deal, it probably costs about the same. You can get this camera and this telescope for the price of just that telescope, plus the reducer setup. It is also still less expensive than a C5 plus a reducer setup in most cases. Before publishing, I'll verify the prices and put the current links in the description because telescope pricing is really unstable lately. SVBONY is going to get a coupon code for anyone that is interested in buying the MK127. Their coupon codes do stack, so check down in the description for the Francisco coupon code and click on the link to take you to SVBONY's store. Those are affiliate links, but anyways, those are down there. But the basic point is this. This combo here, I'll put it together. Sorry for these terrible sounds. This combo here can get you a real small galaxy imaging setup for a lot less money than the more traditional Celestron SCT route. I want to talk about the part that made me stop trusting my own eyeballs and hands. Collimation. I have collimated plenty of SCTs. I'm not great at it, but I'm pretty decent. You center a star, defocus, adjust the secondary, recenter it, repeat, and try not to make it worse while pretending you're staying calm. The MK127 was a little different. The collimation system felt much more like a push-pull arrangement, which I think is what it is. So it's almost closer in spirit to collimating like a Newtonian than the classic SCT process that I'm used to. Push-pull. So you have to move the screws in pairs. I recorded the whole process. I recorded the screen of me doing it. So I'll probably have that playing here just so you can see. What made it confusing to me is that I couldn't get parts of the star pattern to look good while keeping everything else looking good. At what point, the outer rings looked fairly circular, but the shadow wasn't centered. And when I adjusted the shadow, the outer ring started looking oblong. So that's the kind of thing. It was really making me wonder whether I got whether there was tube currents or mechanical stress or astigmatism, or just if that was part of the learning curve of a separate secondary Mac. So I did email SVBONY about it because I was like, hey, what's going on here? By the time they got back to me the next day, I had already taken care of it. I don't know if I was just getting stressed out because I hadn't had a clear night in 2 weeks, and it was the first clear night that I was going to get. So I was like, oh man, I really need to take advantage of this. So I think part of it was me. I think I over torqued some of the screws. So I think that I was putting an additional stress on that secondary mirror, and that was basically showing up as astigmatism. So I'm not going to say that this scope is defective based on that one difficult collimation session. I think it was mostly me messing it up. It's better collimated now. If I had more clear skies, I would spend a little bit more time with it. I also think that one of the differences was Macs can take longer to thermally settle. So this scope, like most Maksutovs, has a huge chunk of glass in the front, and that can take longer to settle thermally than similar sized SCTs. So a little bit of admissions here. With my SCTs, I often feel comfortable leaving them outside on the mount, but under a reflective cover. So the AstroZaps or just a barbecue grill cover. They still need to cool when night comes, but they settle pretty quickly for my use. The MK127 though, I started treating this a little bit differently. In the mornings, first thing in the morning, I take it off the mount and leave it here in the Astro shed during the day so that it's closer to the outside temperature before I start imaging and it's not getting baked by the sun. And that's, I think, one of the things that seemed to help me on that second night. So if you are grabbing this as if you're buying this as a grab-and-go Galaxy scope, it's worth knowing. Don't leave this in your super hot car and then hope that you can take it out and immediately get it going. The scope is physically compact, but thermally it may not behave like, a tiny refractor. It still needs time to cool off. Astrophotography likes to keep the suffering balanced, so you're not breaking your back by lugging this thing around, but you are going to have to worry about thermals. I'm pretty happy with this. This is probably the first time I've done any real imaging with Mac, and on this relatively inexpensive, this is a legitimately decent Galaxy image. You can see the structures in M51, the companion is very clear, and honestly this framing works so well with this 533, and I think this scope camera combo feels like it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's not the deepest M51 I've ever taken. I think NASA and my C11 both remain entirely unthreatened. But for a small backyard or travel galaxy rig, this is super respectable, especially for just a couple hours. The easiest comparison here is those two, the C5 and the C6. Like I said, the C6 has the same native focal length, but about 18% more aperture, which gives it more light gathering area. But the C6 plus reducer setup costs so much more, especially once you include the accessories, that I would rather just use that money to spend more time trying to gather images. The C5 is a lot closer in size and portability. Let me grab it off the wall here. And the MK127 only has about 2% more aperture by diameter. I think this is 125, this is 127. But it has 20% more focal length. And in my sample, the MK127 looked sharper both visually and in imaging than my sample of a Celestron C5. That said, SCTs can vary a lot from unit to unit, and who knows, maybe I have one of those mushy C5s. And that's why I want to be careful with what I say in some of these parts. I'm not saying that every MK127 beats every C5. What I'm saying is this MK127, once I got it behaving, looked better than this C5 to my eye. When I posted up, I think I was posting about the files that I was making. A couple of the members asked if I could do some visual use comparison. So I did spend some time with it visually. I mostly looked at the moon and Jupiter because those are the two that have been really interesting. And it's again here where this accessory package really helps. The scope includes 1.25, but also the 2-inch visual back, which I like because then I can just use it with my 2-inch diagonals. And a 2-inch visual back for most scopes that don't have one can actually cost a decent amount of money. Visually, I compared it to the C6. The MK127 maybe didn't feel as bright, which sort of makes sense, but the C6 was maybe a little bit more crisp. Now that C6 is really well tuned. I do imaging with it. I use it all the time. So I would say, if anything, they were maybe the same in clarity on the moon, but maybe the C6 edged out a little bit. And with imaging, they're actually really similar. But the cool thing about comparing these two is the magnification image scale feels similar because the focal length is exactly the same. So compared to my C5, where did you go? You're back here. Compared to my C5 for visual use, again, I think maybe I have a mushy C5, or maybe this is how all C5s are. But I had to, use a higher magnification eyepiece to get the same sort of field of view because this has a slightly less focal length. Because this one is about 20% longer. And again, like I said, I think my C5 maybe always looks a little soft. But to my eye, the moon looked just really nice, crisp and contrasty. I could make out the bands in Jupiter through the MK127. The thicker front glass here does shift the balance forward a little bit when we're talking about mounting these up for use. And that can actually help depending on the mount and your accessories. I was using it on an Altaz. And it actually felt really nice and felt really well balanced on the mount. So for visual use, it might be a C6 replacement. The brightness wasn't that different, and in sharpness they were really, really similar. And this one is just so much less expensive than a new C6 that it's kind of hard to recommend one of those. I would just officially say that as a small, compact, planetary, double star, small object scope, the MK127 makes a lot of sense, especially when you see what these Celestron units go for retail. I don't know that you're actually getting a ton more with the C6. You're getting more aperture, which in theory has a little bit more resolving power, but I don't even know that I noticed that. This isn't all roses though, right? There are some downsides going with a less common telescope like this. They've probably sold more C5s and C6s than SVBONY has sold, any telescope they've ever made. And one of the problems is the accessory ecosystem. Celestron SCTs have decades of accessories and adapters and focusers and dew shields, reducers and brackets and weird little parts that somebody probably already made. The MK127 doesn't have that same accessory universe, but this is where 3D printing can come in and really save the day. So I designed this 3D printed dew shield that just clips onto the front, or just goes on the front like that. And I also designed this 3D printed focuser bracket. Now the focuser bracket just attaches on the back. You actually just, I'll stand this up on here. You take this focuser bracket and you slide it over the sort of where this comes out to attach your telescope or your eyepieces or your cameras. And it's designed to just fit all the way forward. There we go. And then I had to design this little part right here, which is essentially like, it goes onto the coarse focus ring, and it has the same amount of teeth on the outside as the belt. So I'll put the links to the belt that you should use to mount this down in the description. But when you 3D print this, you'll need to buy the belt if you don't already have one. So there's this like almost translator cog, and it slides over, like I said, the coarse focus ring. And then you take the belt and you just slide this over. There we go. And you rotate it to give it some tension. And for astrophotography use, that works really well. So I'll have, yeah, so that works super well on here. And I'll make these files available for free on my website, linked down below. If you have a 3D printer, just print them for yourself. Now, if you don't have a 3D printer, I am willing to print copies for you for basically the cost of parts plus shipping. I'm not trying to turn Deep Sky Lab into like a dew shield empire. But between the material and like time and energy costs for these, it's about $9 for the focuser bracket and about $10 for the dew shield. It's kind of big and it takes a long time to print. The files are free. Please just download them, go to your local library and have them printed if you don't have your own. And if you do want the printed parts, just pay me the cost of the parts plus, you know, the shipping, which we'll see. Just send me an email. So after spending probably 2.5 nights under the stars with the MK127, here's what I like about it. First, that focal length is genuinely useful, especially this time of year, galaxy season. At 1500 millimeters, it's right in the zone for small galaxies, globular clusters, planetary nebula, even like lunar and planetary work. This is exactly the same native focal length as my C6, which I really like, but just in a different optical package. Now, the C8, which there's one there and one over there, has 60% more aperture by diameter and about 140% more light gathering area than the native focal length of the MK127. So the MK127 is not really trying to replace a C8. This is more about getting useful reach, but in a much smaller package. Most of the time, a telescope you can travel with is probably one of those wide field ones. Second, the value prop here is really strong. The scope includes a lot of these accessories that would cost extra elsewhere, including the reducer, the 2 visual backs, all that stuff. And third, in the time I spent with it paired with the SV605CC, it makes a very compact and affordable galaxy season imaging setup. Fourth, the image quality I got on this stack of M51, again, is good enough that I wouldn't dismiss this as a toy or like a visual only scope. The fifth point I have is it is physically manageable. This is the kind of telescope that you can put on a modest mount and not feel like you're building a backyard oil rig or like the whole thing is going to topple over. So I really like how compact it is. It does share that with the C6 and the C5, but this is even a little bit more compact. Now, here's what I didn't like as much on the MK127. Like I said, the collimation process was more confusing to me than my SCTs. It's that push-pull stuff. I think it will get easier with practice, but my first serious experience with it wasn't smooth. I did get it there eventually the next night. I think between letting it cool off more and just like letting myself cool off, like I was getting pissed. I think the collimation, and if you've never done collimation, then you don't have the bad habits and like I do about collimating an SCT. It's similar, just different enough that it was whatever. The cooldown is also slower than the size might suggest. Again, I've never really imaged with Max before, and so the thick front glass needs time. The accessory system is not as mature as the Celestron SCT accessory ecosystem, but I can say this threading here is just SCT thread. So if you have like an SCT external focuser like this will actually bolt on here, which is super cool. And yes, 3D printing helps, but if you ever want, you know, like a dew ring, like a dew heater ring, the C5 and the C6, they have those. You can go buy them. You can't buy those with the MK127, but you can use like the dew heater straps, which is what, actually, I didn't even end up using this. I just printed this dew shield and everything was fine. All right, final verdict. Is the MK127 a contender as a small galaxy hunter? Yes, definitely. It's not a C6 killer. I think they would actually be friends. The C6 has, like I said, a little bit more aperture and a little bit more light gathering area. But for some of these brighter things, especially like planets and the moon, that doesn't particularly matter. But the C6 does have a super long track record. And I think, you know, these MK127s came out just recently, like a year or two ago. If I didn't already own both a C5 and a C6, would I consider the MK127 instead? That is a much harder question than I expected, because when you look at the price and you look at all the included stuff and the compact size, that M51 result with this 605cc, this becomes a real option. But those downsides are real. This scope and camera combo produced a pretty good M51 at 1500 millimeters in a compact package without costing, you know, C6 plus reducer money. Like, I genuinely think you can buy this telescope and this camera for just a little bit more than just the C6. Here's my practical recommendation. If you already own a good C6 or even a really good C5, you probably shouldn't run out and buy an MK127. But if you're looking for a compact, affordable Galaxy season rig, especially when you pair it with like these 533 class sensors, like the 605cc, the MK127 is absolutely worth considering. And in some markets, might just be the best option. It's cheap. It's pretty sharp. It's a little bit weird because it's the Rimac Maksutov. So I'm going to put links to the MK127, the 605cc, and all the 3D printed accessories that I've made down in the description. The scope and the camera links are affiliate links, which help support the channel at no extra cost to you. The 3D files are self-hosted. Those are free. And if you want me to print you a dew shield or a focus bracket, email me through the contact link, either on my website or in the YouTube stuff, and I'll get you one. Let me know in the comments what you would compare this against next. Like, I haven't really done a ton of imaging with my C5. I feel like I should probably do that. Or should I pop the reducer on and compare it to like one of my refractors and see what the field of view really looks like with that? I feel like a lot of other people, though, did test it with the reducer. And yes, at some point, I probably need to drag one of the C8s into this too. So clear skies, and I'll see you on the next one.